So guys, we're in Orange County, California at the ADU Pro Team headquarters. I'm here with Mr. Diego Pirona, co-founder of ADU Pro Team, and we're going to discuss a couple important key components that brought us all together and what we provide for our clients. Here with Diego Pirona. All good?
All good, man.
Yeah.
Just want to talk a little bit about some of the typical things that projects get hung up on. And I think it's important to mention these because if you're trying to make up your mind as to why you would want to go with our team, is you need to know what the differences are. So typically, when you go through any traditional process of doing a design, finance, and construction process, those are separate entities. And by being separate, when there's no communication, things tend to fall through sooner or later. So one of the pluses of working with us is that we can identify upfront things that are going to be issues down the line. The least amount of surprises, the better. And that makes it a more cohesive project. It makes it a better process. So we want to definitely understand that from the get-go. Is if you're working with us, is because you can understand that if I have an existing home, I may also have existing issues. But if someone is just working on plans and no one's gone out to the home to see how they're going to build this, that could be a problem down the line. So part of this is to identify those nuances to then say, okay, we need to get someone out there. By doing that, then anyone that's on the planning side can early identify the issues with maybe the property line is not identified. Maybe there's issues with existing plumbing that we need to include in our initial permitting phase. So that way you do everything at once and right. Those things tend to be issues that come up in many projects that are segmented. So if I went to a traditional way of doing things, is like I go and I hire an architect first. Well, he may be only exposed to a certain scope of work. That he then just says, well, that's the builder's responsibility down the line. And that doesn't help you as a client, because what it does is that it then puts an assumption as to the builder assuming some of that responsibility that maybe he wasn't even aware of and that he was going to be in charge of. These things tend to happen all the time in construction. And it doesn't make it for a better process. It makes it for a more delayed process, even though the cost may be the same. But if you would imagine for a second that if you could expedite your process via having a better system, then why not go that route? That's one of the pluses that I think is the strongest element that makes ADU Pro Team a better team to work with.
Perfect. So I've experienced nightmare projects versus living the dream projects is what I would call it, where it's seamless. And the nightmare projects timeline versus the living the dream projects timeline ultimately costs the client time and money, where they could get that ADU rented out if that's what they're planning on doing for either short-term rental or long-term rental. So my question for you is, obviously it's going to be a little bit different depending on the project, but what would you say, just to give an example of a nightmare project where the communication and the frustrations are high, or the communication is low and the frustrations are high, versus a living the dream project where the communication is great and the timeline is short and the client's happy and everybody involved is happy, just to give an idea.
So I'll give you a very basic one. I have many examples, but I'll give you one example. There's been projects where in the initial design part, because the client decided to go with another builder versus the one that was in our team, they left that part of their project off to the very end. What it didn't help us in the get-go was to be able to understand electrical panel sizes, if the panels were even proper and up to code. It didn't help us identify plumbing issues where the existing lines were deteriorated, where it's something that the architect typically doesn't inspect the quality of a plumbing line, that typically is within the realm of a builder. So where these things come to a clash or a stopping point in the process of construction is you build your ADU, you do your foundation, you do your framing, you do your waterproofing, etc. Sooner or later down the line, they tap into existing utilities. And if those systems haven't been vetted at an earlier point, sometimes they require a city additional permit. So now we have to go back to the city in the process of construction where it could have been done earlier in the planning stages.
Should the communication have been there, strong from the beginning?
Should there have been an initial, at least a sit down with the homeowner to say, have these lines been ever scanned or scoped with, a plumbing survey? Have they ever been, has your electrical been checked? What happens ultimately is that it's inevitable, but once you start a project, there are things that happen because of the way the home was built that may not be obvious, that then happen during the process. So those are hard to identify, but if you have an experienced builder that comes out and we have some of at least the initial check mark of things that should be discussed, those things can now be addressed much earlier without us having to wait to get a final permit. So then the builder can finalize that scope, which delays the homeowner's ability to rent out the property or to get loved ones moved in or whatever the case may be. So those typically are scenarios that are going to be, in a very small example, what typically happens in any project. And that's what we're trying to minimize.
We're trying to eradicate any potential problems because of the expertise that each member brings to ADU team.
Correct.
We're able to essentially forecast exactly what the scope of work and timeline looks like, right? So I always like to go goals for clients. Goals, objectives, timeline, and budget. I can give a couple examples of scenarios. One perfect case scenario. The client came to me and said, Terry, I'm having trouble with the current builder. This contractor doesn't answer his phone, XYZ, whatever problem. I said, okay, well, no problem. I can be there. When do you want to start? And he said, as soon as possible. He had plans. He had everything ready to go. We were ready to break ground. We get in there. Our guys are there. Everything went seamless because the communication was there. And I have great communication with all of our guys, from everybody from the foundation work to framers to everything, drywall, electricians, everything. So it's just a matter of having a quick phone call. It's like, boom, 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 and we got it done very, very fast, right? And there's another nightmare scenario that I was told about, that they went through the planning, permitting, and it could have been done a lot sooner, but the contractor was lagging, excuse after excuse. Finally, when they broke ground, they had some more issues, and they were trying to cut corners. The client ultimately was trying to cut corners, and I was trying to coach them through it because they were trying to save a couple bucks here and there. Mm-hmm. And their intention for this garage ADU conversion was to rent it out. And they could rent it out for, let's just say, $2,000 to $2,200 a month.
Right.
And it's still not finished.
Right.
It's probably 9 months, 10 months in, and this client continues to call me, and it's like, well, you were trying to cut corners, so there's really nothing I can do for you at this point.
Right.
So because they were trying to cut corners and save $6,000-$7,000, they ultimately ended, as of today, losing, let's just say, upwards of $22,000 to $26,000 because the job is not done. They can't rent it out, and the frustrations are high. And the anxiety levels and the communication, the contractors don't answer their phones anymore. And there's nothing I can do about it other than say, I'm sorry, you should have went with ADU Pro Team.
Right. Well, that happens in many different dimensions. Even, for example, when you work with separate consultants, it's like when you hand off a portion of the work, if there's any discrepancies when it's within a team, these things get mitigated and they don't get finger pointed. by not finger
That's
pointing.
exactly what happens. Oh, we'll talk to him. Oh, and then they buy a little more time
Right.
because they don't want to put up with it. Oh, we'll talk to him. Like you said, the finger pointing. Talk to him. And the client just going,
Exactly. What's
shit,
going on?
what am I doing? Like, what's going on?
Well, that's been that typically happens when there's discrepancies, that because of they're not looking at it as a team. They're looking at it as like, well, that's not my scope. So even though I could easily resolve this, I don't want to spend a single minute additional than I have to.
Mm-hmm.
When you look at things like it's our team, and I have to let Diego know, or Terry know, or Jimmy know, that's a different relationship, because we're trying to protect the team to make sure that we do good work. We're not trying to say, oh, it's him or her or whoever. So those are kind of everyday nuances that typically happen in conventional ways of doing work. Not all the time, but they do happen quite a bit. So those are things that would push me to go in one direction, where it's a one-stop shop.
Mm-hmm. The benefits of working with ADU Pro Team, right? What I tend to ask the clients are, again, goals, objectives, timeline, and budget. And since we have the camaraderie here within ADU Pro Team, we have the trust within each other, the camaraderie, of course, the transparency, and the efficiency. How do these things tie in? How you can translate that to the client, and why they should work with ADU Pro Team? Because again, we're not the cheapest, but we are the best. If you want to go the cheapest, you might not want to go with ADU Pro Team. So can you explain a little bit and elaborate on this?
Yeah, I think what has to happen in any team is that one needs to understand the value that you bring to a team and the level of competency. If there is mistrust or undermining of any sorts, it diminishes the ability to have a better project, right?
Seamless outcome.
As close to seamless, because the reality is there's no project that doesn't have complexities. Mm-hmm. They all have complexities at different types. What we're trying to do here is we're trying to have the right energy of the people collaborating together to have the right outcome. That's in many of our clients' experience working with us. Is what they liked is working with us. At the end of the day, that's a service that we're providing, is that we're going to give you the efficiency of working with professionals that know their trade, but then also there's an experience value that is added to this. Many of these decisions moving forward of having your folks move in with you or having your kids move in with you, they're very attached to a lot of personal emotions. They're attached to personal feelings and things that have value to people. So if you can make this a better experience, why not? And that's what we're talking about here, is we're understanding the prerogatives of your decision making, which is not just only based on money. Sometimes these things have to do with more delicate issues. So navigating that, there has to be some attentiveness to it. And that may be difficult to translate when you're talking with 3 different people versus talking to a team. So that sort of carrying on what the goal of that person's build maybe is imperative.